ध्वनिर्वर्णापदं वाक्यमित्यास्पदचतुष्टयम् यस्याः सूक्ष्मादिभेदे वाग्देवीं तामुपास्महे।
Electronic Media Production and Research Center of Madhya Pradesh, Bhoj Open University presents its audio program Development, Deprivation, Continuity and Change in Southwestern Tribes of Madhya Pradesh. To deliver a lecture on this topic, today we have invited Professor D.C.Shaha. This audio program is edited and directed by Amar Bahadur Yadav. So, let us listen to the audio lecture on Development, Deprivation, Continuity and Change in Southwestern Tribes of Madhya Pradesh.
Development debate has evolved in Indian planet and problematize it to conclude that there were certain wrong assumptions that led to the way tribal development taking place. If we go back to the early 60s, the poverty proportion were around 50% total population. And from there, in 2000 around, this proportion has come down to, in urban areas, around 20%. But still, in tribal areas, especially southwestern Madhya Pradesh tribal belt, as high as around 50% people live in below poverty and half of them in severe poverty conditions. I go back in Indian development planning literature because the policies are not made in vacuum. They are developed from some of the things which are doing here or some of the writing which have been of some use even at that point of time. It was somewhere in mid-70s. Montek Singh Ahluwalia joined the government of India and he was the man who changed the literature from estimating poverty to explaining poverty. And before him, the bulk of the debate was estimation of poverty. And using NSS data, Montek Singh Ahluwalia at that point of time had a time series between 50s and 74 or 5, and he tried to propagate first time that the years when agriculture production fell down were the years in which poverty, rural poverty, deteriorated. And almost a year and a half after, two people, one, Dharam Narayan, he was chairman, pricing commission, agriculture price commission, and price were his passion, brought another, and Ashwin Seth independently brought another formulation and said that it was not only growth in agriculture production, but prices, because it influenced the purchasing capacity of rural people, because half of the farmers are net importer of food grains, the wage goods. And so, bulk of the strategy in influencing poverty center around these two forces, that if we can quickly increase our production and if we can keep prices under control, rural poverty could be influenced. And willy-nilly, this was the strategy of Indian state. And somewhere in late 80s, another formulation which was developing from World Bank started emerging, that it is not only these things, these are some sort of demand creating processes. There is another process which could be the investment capacity of Indian state, especially in social sectors. And serious writings from scholars, Indian as well as outsiders, started playing down the role because it was too loaded to growth, and said that, and Kerala model was already existing in mid-80s, and say that if the social sector spending could be improved, and they also gave very clear evidences that whenever that type of investment from state was lower, the poverty accentuated. And this is the frame from 1960s to till date influencing poverty. And that is also been in some form totally taken to influence tribal poverty or tribal development. That means you invest, if you give environment for production enhancement and some services, education and health, things will be in order. And it didn't work, as I was giving you some of the numbers. Still, larger frame, policy frame worked quite all right in non-tribal area. In tribal area, it didn't work. Why? I see the explanation which is explaining poverty in non-tribal area is very different than what is happening in tribal area. And need not to elaborate about access failure to resources in tribal area. It's a historical fact. But that dates back pre-British. Marathas were also as a tribal exploiter in this whole belt. But with British, the resourcelessness of tribal started. Both they thrown up a man called Banya in that area as an agent for tax collection. But he worked more as a money lender. Apart from institutional changes or just like gender, ethnicity, policies in non-tribal area, here also some of these changes also accentuated this whole process. But the development planning after independence put the last nail on resourcelessness of tribal. I would say that somewhere all through this development process, there were islands of prosperity amidst mass poverty with the development policy Indian state was pursuing. What has gone wrong in this Indian development process? I think they did not consider that the process of resourcelessness is still changing because of three very important processes. One, the population pressure in the tribal area. The population growth is significantly higher in whole tribal belt in western part except Gujarat. The shocks which tribal face, just like population, within a generation, the economic hierarchy reshuffles in form of a large farmer becoming marginal farmer. With 7 children, a 20-acre land is less than 2 acre, 6, 7 piece getting into 20-acre land. So economic hierarchy in a generation reshuffles so fast that even a resourceful farmer becomes resourceless within generation. But the social norms, especially a son's marriage or a shock in form of sickness, creates a situation in which large number of even resourceful farmers or tribals need to borrow from. And this becomes a social dimension. It's just not a market transaction. It is a failure of market which creates failure of credit market, which creates a situation in which social process of livelihood struggle take a very different shape. As land resources are very, very meager for at least 50 to 60% of the farmers, a crop failure could bring another 30-35% farmers in tribal area to that group, which has lost all the resources. So their livelihood rests around laboring around the villages, which is very little opportunities there, except for towns where adjoining to Maharashtra where cotton gins are there, or Narmada Valley where non-tribal patidars have displaced tribals a century back because of the British policy, give some employment opportunities. But that type of employment opportunities are not very many, and maybe a very small portion of tribals' needs could be met by this. The basic strategy is migration, because you have to borrow to keep your family alive in a shock situation with crop failure or sickness or a death in the family or son's marriage, and you have to borrow anywhere around 20,000 in today's prices. And to repay that, a social process starts in which you move out sometime with your family or alone and go to sugarcane fields in Surat, irrigated Baroda and Maharashtra, and work as a attached labor, not bonded, attached labor for whole year, or as a sugarcane cutter in Surat, as a daily wage earner, and stay there and live in very inhuman condition, come back and repay the loan to the moneylender, Banya. But this creates a situation in which whole effort to survive is constrained by repayment of loan by the household head. Three things are also changing in this structure. One is the tribal, the way they live, has a very close-knit community, and the tribal falia, the small pockets in the tribal village, 7 to 8 kilometers, are distributed into around 4 to 10 falias. And in each falia, very close relation live together. The settlement pattern and the remoteness from state, because the law, judiciary and policing, though exist, but they have their own custom and own rule in settling their small or large problems or disputes. And third, in some form, these two things, the settlement pattern and the remoteness of the state, has created an environment in which tribal have very close network, a very, very strong social capital base. But that social capital base was dormant all throughout, because they were not able to manifest it to, say, development or governance process. But you like it or not, in early 90s, when Narmada Bachao Andolan and Adivasi Mukti Sangathan started operating in this area, a large number of tribal people came in their contact, and the awareness level has increased so much that if you go today in many of the submerging foothills or hills, which is coming under Narmada submergence, you won't be allowed to go inside to work. So the whole society or the community comes together and decide whether this new entry from outside would be allowed or not. And that is, this vibrancy of social capital has both vicious as well as virtuous manifestation. They would not even allow you or a researcher to enter into field. They would even say a development structure not to be put in place, water harvesting conservation type of a structure, because they would feel in some of the areas that their access to natural resources are constrained by these barriers. This type of a and very vibrant social three type of a leadership is emerging. One created by this political decentralization and tribal leaders emerging as very, very influential group. The second is the social leadership, which manifests itself in form of social capital in various fields. And third is economic hierarchy. State, I'm sorry to say, has not reached there, and an individual initiative in form of creating irrigation structures in a very, very difficult area has created and snowball in terms of many people taking that type of investment. Another type of a hierarchy, I call it economic hierarchy. It's a basically tussle between these three. And in this type of tussle, the whole community, which looks from outside as very homogeneous, is extremely stratified in all these lines. The unfortunate part is that if the social capital is so vibrant, why it is not manifested in itself in political decentralization? Political decentralization in that area has given a new role to some of the leaders in each village, but the bureaucracy, the lower level bureaucracy, whatever was, and the way it was operating pre-decentralization has been replaced by this leadership. Nothing has changed other than that. And unfortunately, there are no community pressures to change that also. A coterie of the Sarpanch and very nearby people, and the nearby people are from Falia, are enjoying. So if I have a map, two villages which I studied, I will find that all investment, if it has come in the village, it has come in the Falia where Sarpanchs live. And remaining 7, 8 or 4 or 3 have no that type of facilities. We find that economic variables like agriculture production, asset holding, irrigation, very strongly associated very strongly with poverty. And we tried to understand the poverty in two frames. One, poor, and then subdivided them into chronic poor. And the chronic poor had been identified through a social process rather than economic process. The social process is that if you have lost silver in last 10 years, if you missed meals, if you have unable to repay your loans, couldn't service your debt, and have come into land transactions which are degrading. Like market failure in larger society brings short-term land transaction in form of land leasing out. And in tribal society, land as it is a way of life, it is more important not only as an economic for sustenance, it has a cultural value. So parting it is a degrading situation. A significant amount of increase in land leasing and leasing out has increased because people have to leave the village, and in order to optimize their labor earning capability, they would give their land into a deal for 6 months or a year and earn on land as well as on labor. These are the processes. If these are the processes, in my opinion, your development planning strategy need to center around issues of creditworthiness, consumption loan and availability, and livelihood struggles. If these issues are not in the frame of influencing poverty, the way poverty is being tried to reduce in tribal area unsuccessfully, keeping on with the same strategy would not change the face of tribal population. Thank you.
You are listening to an audio lecture on development deprivation, continuity and change in southwestern tribes of Madhya Pradesh. Lecture was delivered by Professor D.C.Shaha. The announcer was Dr. Harkirat Bains and the recordist was Rajendra Pandey. This program was edited and directed by Amar Bahadur Yadav. This audio program was produced and presented by Electronic Media Production and Research Center of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University.